Aunt was a young woman. Whenever she was alone at home, she would call me to her. I too was forced to go to her and spend some beautiful moments with her. It had been a long time since I had lived with Aunt. That is why she did not hide anything from me anymore. One day Aunt was alone at home when she called me to her and showed me her face. My aunt was very beautiful. It did not seem like she was a married woman. At that time, I had come to live in my Uncle Haider's house. Because both my mother and Abu were going to Saudi Arabia. Before the wedding, when Pule aunt came to meet Abu and congratulate him, she told Abu while leaving to leave Bilal in our house. Abu forbade him a lot that now Bilal is grown up and can take care of himself, but he did not agree. He convinced Abu and my heart's desire was fulfilled. I have the key to our old house which is lying empty, which I use a lot for my purposes. Aunt Amara got married to my uncle about 10 years ago. I was 10 years old at that time, but at that time, I liked seeing my uncle very much. Because she was not only beautiful but also had a soft voice and a full body. The couple of aunt and aunt was considered ideal. But until now, both of them were deprived of the blessing of children, and perhaps they both considered it their fate and were patient. Aunt and aunt had a lot of love. And I guessed that aunt would not have wasted a single night with them. Because after marriage, aunt's body had become so attractive. Her appearance was already amazing. But now every part of her body felt inviting towards her. At that time, aunt was cleaning the house. And I was watching TV. Then aunt asked me, Bilal son, are you not going to college today? So I said, feeling bad for aunt calling my son, no, aunt, the semester is over, right? That's why I have a month and a half of vacation. Aunt shook her head and bent down and started hitting the table with a cloth. I didn't understand what to do or what not to do. 2 days had passed. I came to aunt's house. At the dinner table at night, aunt told aunt and me that she wanted me to go to Lahore for the day. If she had to go out for a long time, she would have taken aunt with her. But this time, since I was at aunt's house, she thought it would be appropriate to go alone. I carefully examined aunt's routine and her habits. I saw that she consumes tea a lot. And tea is made with open milk, and I am used to drinking tea with canned milk. The next day, I was playing a game. I was wearing headphones. I don't know that aunt came and sat with me. And watching me playing. We friends were using off words with each other. And whatever nonsense I was talking about was very vulgar. Aunt was surprised and worried. She was listening to me talking nonsense. Then she tried to make me feel her presence by calling out to me. But I couldn't hear anything because of the music. Aunt listened to my nonsense for a long time. And then got up and went to her room. In the evening, I started going out to meet some friends, so I went to her room to tell aunt. I didn't have anything special in mind at that time. Then I came back and lay down on the bed. After a while I said that I want to drink tea, I will make it. Aunt smiled and said, why not, my child? Just freshen up in 2 minutes. Then I will make it. And got up and went to the bathroom. I came to the gallery and sat down. And started looking at the lawn and flowers in front. I liked one flower. I went to see it closely and then plucked it. Aunt was calling out to me. I replied. When I was outside, she came out holding a tray in her hand, in which there were 2 cups of tea. She handed me 1 cup. And she picked up the other one herself and placed it on the table. I took the flower, which was in my hand. I extended it towards my aunt. My aunt smiled and took the flower from my hand and said, thank you, my child. All my dreams had been dashed. I looked at my aunt and said that my aunt doesn't get bored staying at home all day. I am bored. Let's go out somewhere and roam around. My aunt said, no, Bilal, I go everywhere with your aunt. But I can't do anything without her. I kept quiet and started drinking tea. After dinner, I put on a movie. And after sitting down, I started watching. My aunt also came and sat down next to me. And started watching the movie. When my aunt saw that this was the same nonsense that I was doing while playing games in the afternoon, she said, good. You have learned all the abuse and nonsense from here. She said, son, this is very dirty. You use very vulgar language. I was sweating with shame. My aunt then said, I will talk to Asiya. She said, keep an eye on you. You are getting out of hand. I looked up and said to my aunt that I made a mistake. Forgive me, but what can I do? All the boys talk the same nonsense. I have to answer them too, so these kinds of things come out of my mouth. My aunt laughed and said, don't be afraid, I won't tell anyone. I know what kind of talk you boys do. Okay, friend, put on another movie. What is this? Then I caught my breath. And I asked my aunt which movie should I put on. So she said, put on an Indian movie. I put on an Indian movie. My aunt was watching Modi and I was secretly watching her. My aunt lifted one of her legs and placed it on the other leg and sat down comfortably against the back and arm of the sofa. Then I also lifted one of my legs and placed it on the other leg. I felt that my aunt had noticed this move of mine. And a slight smile came on her face. I was also sitting in the other corner like my aunt. Then the aunt smiled and adjusted her position and I also saw her and thought it was better to sit properly. The aunt laughed and said to me, "Bilal, you are copying me." I looked at her and shook my head. Then she pretended to be angry and said, "Why are you trying to annoy me?" I also said, "Yes, a little," carelessly, and then she laughed and said, "Why?" So I immediately said, "Man, it has been so many days. I have not been scolded by anyone or teased by anyone. You are extremely boring." She frowned and said, "Bilal, am I really bored?" So I said, "I don't know what will happen to me if I stay alone." The aunt smiled and said, "Hit me. I want to eat." So I put it on. She was thinking of me as some innocent naughty child and this was to my advantage. Well, while talking nonsense like this, Auntie became quite free from me. When at 11 o'clock at night, Auntie's call came on her mobile and she got up and walked towards her room. I watched a movie for a while. I turned off the TV and started walking towards my room. Then I heard a voice from Auntie's room. "I miss you so much. I don't know how these days will pass." I don't know what was said from the other side. But what Auntie said was no less than a surprise for me. In the morning, I got up early and freshened up and went towards the kitchen. It was no less than a surprise for me. In the morning, I got up early and freshened up and went towards the kitchen and saw the kitchen. I was nobody. I went to my aunt's room and looked. The door was closed, which means my aunt is sleeping. I went to the kitchen and made some toast for myself. And then I heated some slices and sat at the table and started having breakfast. I was having breakfast when the door of my aunt's room opened and she came out. Seeing me, she said, feeling a little embarrassed, "I didn't sleep at night. I slept very late. That's why I couldn't get up early in the morning." I smiled and said, "No problem. You have to have breakfast, right? Let's go, I'll make your breakfast today." She said, "You and breakfast? Wow, what's the matter?" I said, "Come freshen up and I'll make breakfast. Then we'll talk." My aunt nodded and went back to her room smiling. So I said, "Breakfast, aunt. What would you like?" Aunt laughed and said, "Don't talk nonsense, Bilal, I'm already embarrassed." I bowed my head again and said, "As you wish," and turned and started walking towards the kitchen. Aunt saw me and sat on the chair. I went behind her chair and bowed and said, "Auntie, your breakfast." And placed the tray in front of her. Aunt was smiling at me. Aunt ran her hand over my head and messed up my hair. And said, "Wow, you're very wise. I thought you would also be careless like the boys of today." I held Aunt's hand, which was on my head and said, "Man, you ruined my style." Aunt slapped me lightly on the cheek and he said nothing bad happened. Sit comfortably and have breakfast. Aunt had breakfast and then said, "Bilal, thank you very much, let's be friends." Today I laughed like this after a long time. And what is such a good breakfast? "Thank you," I made a face and said. "So am I not your friend?" Aunt pinched my cheek and said, "Be friends but be friends for today, you turtles." I pinched my cheek. "Man, this is a very dirty habit. You make Auntie's cheeks red." Aunt then started laughing and raised both hands towards my ears. So I started running. Aunt ran after me laughing and said, "I look like an aunt to you." Aunt stopped. And putting her hand on her waist and taking a breath, she said, "Okay." Then she sat down on the big chair next to her. I went to her and said what happened. Then Aunt suddenly stood up and pinched both my ears and started laughing. I made a crying face and said, "I have no friendship with you. You are so heartless." Aunt looked at me with a laugh and said, "Okay, sorry, man." Aunt separated from me and said, "Okay, I will change and then I have to bring some things. They are coming from the market." I said, "Okay, I will change too. Maybe some girl will get stuck with me and I will get angry too." Aunt smiled and slapped me on the back and said, "Stop it, Bilal." I said in surprise, "What did you say?" I said, "Madam, with your stormy actions," I said, "my friend, there should be some color in your life, otherwise you will not leave me for any use for the rest of my life." Aunt did not understand what I was saying at first, but when she understood, she took off her shoes and said, I was ashamed and laughed and went into my room. After a while, I came out of the room and sat on the sofa and started watching TV. After a while, Aunt also came out. When she came out, my breath was in both directions. Looking at Aunt in a white shirt and jeans, I said, "What do you mean, madam?" Aunt first looked at herself, then looked at me, surprised, and said, "Why, what happened?" I said, placing my hand on my heart, "Madam, no one outside knows that you are married to someone." Aunt smiled and said, "Are you talking nonsense?" I said, "Nothing will happen." When she told me to come, I went to eat. Pointing towards me, I said, "I agree that there must be thousands of your crazy people in the city. But who will open a shop so early in the morning?" Aunt realized her mistake and said, "You are right." I said, "Madam, when you go out, people will be looking at you, right?" Aunt smiled and said, "Bilal, be ashamed, I am your aunt." I also bowed my head and said, "Oh, Aunt." She laughed and sat next to me and said, "You will not stop flirting." I said without looking at her, "Who would want to flirt with you?" Aunt smiled. "I am sorry, my friend." After a short silence, Aunt came closer to me and said, "In fact, you do not have a girlfriend." I looked at her and said, "I have never met anyone like you, otherwise I would have made her my life partner, even if I had to make my father cry." Aunt smiled and said, "I like you." So I bowed my head again like an innocent lover and said softly, "Too much." Aunt laughed and said, "You won't stop." Aunt said, "Bring me milk, Bilal." It was over. I nodded and went to the market. I came back and put the milk container in the fridge. And went to Aunt's room to tell Aunt. But the scene in front of me was enough to drive me crazy. Aunt must have taken a bath. And at this time, anger was pouring down. And my condition became such that I had no life in my legs. I was about to turn back when Aunt called out and asked, "Have you got blisters, milk?" No sound was coming out of my throat. I nodded, then Disaster slowly walked towards me. And placed her hand under my face and asked, "What happened?" I covered my face, raised up, and looking into her eyes said nothing. Aunt looked straight into my eyes and said, "Bilal, tell the truth, it is good for me to come in front of you like this." I shook my head and bowed my head again and said, "If you think I am being attracted to you, then you are wrong. Madam, I agree that your body is a means of expressing your love, but that is not all." Aunt took a deep breath and looked at me as if I were crazy. I raised my head again and said, "But I don't even want you to adopt me for a while. And then deprive me of your sight for the rest of my life." This was a very delicate stage for Aunt. Then she sat on one side of the bed and said, "Come to me. Sit here." I walked comfortably and sat next to her. She held my hand and placed it on her other hand and said, "Bilal should be grateful for whatever I get." What was going on in Aunt's mind? But at that time, she was thinking of leaving the battlefield and running away. I calmly returned from the room. It was then that I felt that Aunt was crying inside. The sound of her sobbing could be heard outside. I went to the door and asked if you were okay. There was no response from inside. The sobbing just stopped. I asked again, "Aunt, what is the matter? Why are you crying?" A voice came from inside. "Bilal, I want to be alone for a while. Please go to your room." I said, "Okay. Are you okay?" Aunt said, "Yes, I am okay." I didn't understand what to do next. I came back quickly and after some time, my aunt also came out fresh. And she started apologizing to me. From that day on, I started taking care of my aunt a lot because she was very lonely. I also called my aunt and called her back home. Since my aunt was a young and beautiful woman, she was very eager to erase her loneliness. But it was fortunate that no such relationship was established between us. I spent a few more days at my aunt's house and then my parents returned home and I went back to my house. I would like to request my viewers and listeners that one should never leave their young daughter, sister or wife in the care of anyone because Satan is the open enemy of man. He is always trying to seduce people. No one is doing this. What kind of bad thing is this? The whole world is doing it. Enjoy now, repent later. The door of repentance is closed to you now. The rest will be seen later. Enjoy now. Anyway, humans are prone to sin. Humans are bound to sin, but it was fortunate that no such relationship was established between me and my aunt. When a beautiful woman stays with a non-mahram for many days, one day she will cross her limit. So always take care of your honor. Sometimes it happens that the husband leaves his wife and goes abroad or somewhere far to work, then the poor woman can control herself for a certain period of time, but when her patience runs out, she becomes ready to do bad things. So dear friends, always keep your wife with you so that your honor remains permanent. And you should pay her due. And may he also avoid committing major sins.